Morning, ladies and gentlemen. As you know, a little less than an hour ago, Jessica Kelley entered into a plea agreement with the state of New Mexico to resolve the outstanding charges and the pending trial that she was facing with respect to the killing of Victoria Martens. Under the terms of that plea agreement, she agreed to plead no contest to 6 counts, including child abuse resulting in death, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy to commit tampering, and 3 counts of tampering with evidence. This brings to a conclusion the case against Ms. Kelley and subjects her to 50 years of total jurisdiction in the Department of Corrections. It does not, however, conclude the prosecution of all the individuals who are responsible and accused in the death of Victoria Martens. And our attention now turns to the pending trial of Fabian Gonzalez. We are fortunate under the terms of this agreement to have the benefit of Jessica Kelley's cooperation in the prosecution of Mr. Gonzalez, and again have her cooperation in the potential apprehension and hopefully the eventual prosecution of the unidentified 4th male who was also involved in this horrific killing. This plea agreement is largely the same as what was proposed by the state and agreed to by the parties last year. The primary difference is that the plea that was entered is one of no contest as opposed to the guilty plea. The parties, as you know, intended to enter into that plea agreement, but that agreement was rejected by the court. We were able to fashion an agreement that substantially exposes Ms. Kelley to the same amount of time in the Department of Corrections and satisfies the concerns of the court and also brings some finality, at least to this second of the 3 suspects that are charged with the death of Victoria Martens. One of the things that I think it's important for the community to understand is this is not a decision that we made or that I made lightly. I understand full well how traumatic this case has been for members of the community. And it is not a perfect outcome. It is not something that is, I think, ideal in terms of what we all would like to see happen in these cases. However, we are confronted as prosecutors with our ability to present cases based on the facts and the evidence that we have. We, as you know, identified some issues with the original investigation, which altered the course of our prosecution and had to inform our decision to enter into this plea agreement. There were a number of additional unanticipated procedural developments and rulings by the court that also, I think, supports the idea that we should enter into this agreement so that we can bring certainty to the community and move us towards obtaining real justice for Victoria Martens. And with that, I'll stand for your questions.
Do you hope that maybe that now she can maybe testify against Fabian Gonzalez? Maybe try to get that name of mystery man out there?
Right. So she is, under the terms of the plea agreement that was entered into today, obligated to not only cooperate with law enforcement and participate in any investigation that pertains to the killing of Victoria Martens, but she's specifically obligated to testify in the upcoming trial against Fabian Gonzalez. So we fully expect her testimony to be a part of that proceeding.
Raul, in layman's terms, what was Jessica Kelley's role in Victoria's death? Walk us through what she pled guilty to in layman's terms.
Right. So at this point, because we have a pending trial and we have an outstanding defendant that we're going to be proceeding to trial, I'm not in a position to sort of detail all of the things that we anticipate introducing as evidence. There was a factual basis that was submitted today in support of the plea agreement. You'll have access to that factual basis that will march you through all of the facts and elements. But I certainly don't want to be in a position where we impact the upcoming trial against Fabian Gonzalez.
Attorneys for Jessica Kelley said the type of virus Victoria had was not sexually transmitted, so she was not raped. Is that correct? Is that accurate?
So it's as you know, in the last week, the state dismissed the criminal sexual penetration charge against Miss Kelley. What we did in anticipation and in preparation of this trial is to take the forensic report from the Office of the Medical Investigator and obtain testimony and consultation from multiple experts and forensic experts. It was their judgment upon reviewing those reports and those facts that they could not conclusively say that she had been raped. And so this is yet another development in the case that was, again, an unexpected development. We rely in making charging decisions on the reports that are submitted, not only by law enforcement, but also the reports that are submitted by forensic experts in OMI. But when we consulted with other experts, they could not determine that the findings that were originally identified in the original pathology report were actually indicative of sexual penetration. And because of that, we couldn't meet our burden of proof. We had an obligation to dismiss that.
They also blamed the OMI, saying that the person who performed her autopsy, who oversized, was not board certified and inexperienced. Is that accurate?
I'm not going to comment on the certification of the specific physicians that were involved in this. I would defer to OMI in terms of giving their perspective on the level of certification. What I can tell you is that as prosecutors, we are obligated to present and examine the evidence that we are given, and then go the extra mile to try and re-examine the strength of all of that evidence. And it was in the process of doing that and contacting additional experts that serious questions came to light about whether or not there was in fact any evidence of criminal sexual penetration.
What does this tell you about the competency of people who are supposed to be doing their job around our state? I know it's not just this most recent thing that you guys discovered, but with the district attorney's office, with the initial investigation,
Right.
How are we supposed to trust that things are getting covered the way they should?
Right. I think the lesson from this case in general is that all of the stakeholders inside the criminal justice system can do a much better job. And we do our very best to be professionals, to examine the evidence, to look at every angle of a case, and to work with our law enforcement partners, our partners at OMI, to examine specific cases, but also to learn important lessons for the future. I think there are a lot of important lessons to be learned from this case, not only from the perspective of law enforcement, but how the case was originally handled when it came into this office, and also the Office of the Medical Investigator. There's certainly a lot of lessons to be learned. And the most important thing is for leaders in those institutions to recognize these issues and commit themselves, as I know they will and they have, to getting it right and doing a better job.
And I know whenever we're talking about proving something in court, it's much different than maybe what people at home think of when they think of justice.
Right.
When we talked to the defense attorney today, just after the plea deal, he was talking that Jessica Kelley will have to actually serve a little over 20 years. To people at home, that may not seem like justice. So how can you kind of break that down?
Well, our obligation is to obtain an agreement which is supported by the evidence, and then have her accept responsibility for those counts that we believe we can prove, and impose the sentence that the law allows for. As prosecutors, we don't determine what those sentences are. We don't determine either what the original charges are subject to or the credit that's available under our system. That's a question that has to be addressed at the legislature. That's a question that has to be addressed in Santa Fe if the community believes that the crimes that she pled no contest to should be subjected to greater punishment, then that's something that should be taken up in the roundhouse.
Raul, how frustrating is it for you if you are, I mean, over the course of 2 years, a few months back you said there were some mistakes made by the original investigators, and then we're hearing now there were mistakes made by an inexperienced person who works for the medical examiner. And this is one of the biggest cases in the state's history. You rely on these people to bring these cases to trial. How frustrating is it for you as a DA when there are mistakes made in these positions?
Well, I mean, I think, like everyone else in the community, I'm frustrated by what happened. But as somebody who has a responsibility to change the system, all I can do is focus on learning these lessons and trying to make sure that this office and that our partners learn everything that we can about changing this. It's obviously frustrating, and I think it's important for people to understand that as prosecutors, we can't go on emotion, and I can't present outrage to the jury. I have to present evidence, and I have to rely on the facts as they're given to us. And so it's important that we commit the resources to training. It's important that we commit the resources to staffing all of these organizations and to building the kind of criminal justice system that I think we all expect and deserve.
What did Victoria's grandparents say when you said there's going to be a plea deal in this case? What did her family say?
So we've had a conversation with the family. They're understandably very upset because I think, like most people in the community, they want more. They expect more. But there are limits to what can be achieved inside the criminal justice system, specifically when you have the kind of series of things that have impacted the investigation. They understood when we had a lengthy conversation last fall about the reason for securing her cooperation, not only to strengthen our case against Fabian Gonzalez, but also to preserve at least the possibility of convicting the unidentified male. While they're, I don't think, satisfied, they understand the situation that we find ourselves in and the fact that we're doing the best that we can.
Mark Ernest had mentioned some delays in the way the specific charges got dismissed. Like back in, I think January 2017, we already did, yes, 2017. We already knew that Victoria did not have meth in her system, yet that charge was not dismissed for another year and a half. What would you say about that?
So I'm not going to comment on the procedural decisions that we made in terms of the timing. What we've attempted to do is to try and safeguard the investigation that was put into place once we understood that the initial steps taken put us on the wrong path. And we have taken every effort to not only safeguard our case against these individuals, but also the possibility of identifying those other individuals. In terms of the timing of those decisions, I'll leave it to other people to give you their perspective. But my perspective is we have managed, I think, a very difficult case, a very difficult situation with extraordinary professionalism and a lot of really hard work. Ms. Rose and Mr. Grayson have dedicated the better part of the last 2 years to this case and just this case, and have understood from the beginning just how challenging it was going to be to secure any convictions at all. And so given the state of things as we received them and the state of where the case was when it was turned over to us, I think while it's not perfect, it's a pretty decent outcome given the limitations of what we have.
Do you think she got justice? Is there justice in this case?
I think a lot of times the criminal justice system does not match up with what a community or thinks the right outcome should be. As attorneys and as people who are leaders in this system, though, we have to abide by the limitations not only of what is presented to us as evidence, but also the sentencing structure, the procedural structures that are put in place, and I don't know that it's justice, but I think it's the best we can do under the circumstances. And our commitment is to try again and correct these issues moving forward, and make sure that it doesn't happen.
I think it was a little while back, maybe last year, when we were talking about the DA's office, and you were saying, you know, out of the question, Fabian Gonzalez is not going to get a plea deal. What does this mean for that case moving forward? Is that a possibility?
I'm not going to comment on the upcoming case against Fabian Gonzalez, other than to say that because of today's plea, we now have Jessica Kelley's cooperation, and I believe that that case is significantly strengthened. I will also tell you that that was one of the considerations that I had to weigh in terms of whether or not it made sense to enter into this plea agreement, and whether or not it made sense to you know, settle for something that you know, may not satisfy all the expectations of the community, but preserves our ability to hold everyone accountable. And one of the things that has sort of haunted me from the beginning is this notion that we would be forced into a place where we wouldn't be able to hold everyone accountable, either because of the evidence and because of the facts. And unfortunately, that's the nature of what it means to do this job.
So do you think that she's done more than just let this mystery man walk into the apartment and into Victoria's room? Do you think that she had a critical role in this?
Right. So I'm not going to comment on things that I expect were going to be the subject of testimony in the upcoming trial. Very mindful of the idea that we have to make sure that the presentation of that evidence is not something that we talk about today. We have submitted pleadings that outlines the factual basis, and we'll let the testimony speak for itself when it comes forth in the trial against Fabian Gonzalez.
Any idea when that case is going to go to trial?
No, that case is currently stayed and up on appeal with the Court of Appeals, given the exclusion of certain pieces of evidence by the district court. We're going to take a look at all of the things that were excluded and see what the timeline looks like. But right now, the appellate process is in motion and it's out of our control.
Do you idea what the cost is total on all of this?
No, we haven't done a cost analysis, frankly, at this point, of all the resources and time that have gone into this. What I can tell you is that these are two of the most experienced prosecutors in my office, and they have worked on nothing but this case for the better part of 2 years. And that's an extraordinary level of commitment, in addition to the commitment from the Albuquerque Police Department in detailing some very experienced and seasoned detectives to try to solve this case.
So I want to go back to the statement that was the subject of the hearing late last week, that the office said without her cooperation, the APD investigation into this fourth suspect has stalled. And so I think with this plea deal, people are expecting, oh, okay, so you said that it stalled because of her cooperation. Now we're going to find this fourth suspect. Is there more pressure on you guys and the police department to show some results when it comes to identifying who this mystery person is?
Well, the first thing I can tell you is that this team of prosecutors and the assigned investigators have committed themselves. I can't tell you how many nights and weekends they have been working. So I would just say that they're already committed to doing everything in their power to try and right this wrong and solve this crime. We certainly benefit from the fact of having the opportunity now to meet with her and talk to her. We obviously lost some time, and I don't know what kind of impact that will have, but I will say that our focus right now is on trying and convicting Fabian Gonzalez.
This might be a question for APD, but the two detectives who moved out of your office, are they going to be moving back in your office and working full-time on this case now?
So the detectives who are working on this case continue to work on this case. They continue to run down every lead available, and will be intimately involved with our prosecution team in taking every piece of information that comes forward and running those leads down. So I can tell you that they're committed to this, and again, we can't guarantee anything. I know that they worry and think about this more than anyone, but they're going to do the best that they can to try to make this right.
Do you think Jessica Kelley knows who this mystery man is, or are you hoping her testimony will force Fabian to divulge that information?
Again, I'm not going to comment on things that I think will be the subject of testimony at the upcoming trial. What I will tell you is that the case against Fabian Gonzalez is substantially stronger with her cooperation, and at least the possibility of identifying this unidentified male and hopefully prosecuting that person is at least something that is much stronger for us with her cooperation.
Why was this plea deal entered today? Trials versus start tomorrow. Has it been in the works for a bit?
Well, we've been in contact, obviously, and negotiating with opposing counsel for quite some time, and it's one of those things it's not uncommon inside the criminal justice system, where both sides have to weigh the uncertainty of what might happen against the prospect that things don't go their way. And I think for everyone, it became clear that the best interests of justice were to secure some certainty with regard to her. And again, we don't have everything that we would like in terms of punishment, but we have certainty, and we now have at least the possibility of continuing forward to prosecute those other individuals. So.
And I would like to also just go over again, what makes this deal different than the last deal, and why did Judge Brown accept this deal but not the previous deal?
I won't speculate as to the procedural differences and the distinction that he drew. It's my understanding that there was more comfort with the idea of no contest as opposed to guilty, despite the fact that the parties were comfortable with guilty the last time. This does result in again, approximately the same level of exposure, but it doesn't have that same admission of guilt. It's an admission, it's a no contest plea, which is something that, for reasons I guess we don't fully understand, was something that the court felt was necessary.
Mark Ernest said that Jessica Kelley is going to serve about 20 years of the 50. Is that accurate?
So I don't speculate on her